The Children's Crusade by Jason Shepard. Background. In the early 20th century, many Southern states had passed Jim Crow laws that created separate white and black worlds. The concept behind Jim Crow laws was separate but equal. In reality, the places and services reserved for African Americans were routinely inferior. By the 1960s, many were discouraged about the lack of social progress. However, in 1963, signs of a new approach were at hand. Young African Americans were motivated to enter the struggle for change.
The Children's Crusade by Jason Shepard. Even though the United States Supreme Court had struck down segregation in education in 1954, a seemingly stronger set of rules dictated a divided way of life in the South. Nowhere was this more true than in Birmingham, Alabama. Jim Crow rules strictly controlled where African Americans could attend school and what public facilities they could use, such as parks, pools, hospitals, libraries, and even drinking fountains. Although African American parents had tried to shield their children from the harsh realities of this segregation, many young people were aware of the everyday barriers they faced. Years later, Washington Booker III, who had grown up in Birmingham, put it this way: "We could go for months and never have any close contact with whites. Preparation for protest." In January of 1963, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, a longtime Birmingham activist, began meeting with Martin Luther King Jr., the most prominent national civil rights leader, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The plan was to coordinate protests in his troubled city. King was ready because he and many others considered Birmingham the most segregated city in America. The African American community believed Jim Crow laws in Birmingham to be unconstitutional, meaning that the laws were contrary to the U.S. Constitution. The activists believed they had the right to challenge these unfair laws through protest. Authorities in Birmingham, including the police and fire departments, were aware of the developing plans, and so made their own plans for a response to the protests. Eugene Bull Connor, the Commissioner of Public Safety, was the leader in this effort. They claimed they would be present to defend the interests of the merchants who didn't want businesses disrupted by demonstrations. However, the authorities' true intent was to maintain the rigid codes of segregation that had been a way of life. The launch of Project C. The Birmingham campaign, called Project C for Confrontation, involved targeting downtown merchants for unequal service. Project C called for the desegregation of lunch counters and the hiring of African Americans in department stores. Protests were launched with a series of demonstrations in the form of lunch counter sit-ins, mass meetings, and store boycotts. These peaceful protests were met with violent actions by the authorities, which included blasts from high-pressure fire hoses and swift arrests. On April 12th, King was arrested during a march that had included only 150 volunteers. A few days later, he wrote the now legendary Letter from Birmingham Jail, in which he described his mission of nonviolence in Birmingham. The project leaders, disappointed by the low numbers of marchers, had to accept that they had reached a critical stage. The level of intimidation in Birmingham was so high that the numbers of volunteers had fallen off. Although many supported the aims of the project, they feared the threatening response of authorities. One of the biggest risks to protesters would be the loss of jobs necessary to support families. Such job losses could create an economic crisis. Soon, a radical change of strategy began to unfold. Young ministers and aides to King proposed that young people, instead of adults, act as protesters. It was an unsettling idea at first, considering how roughly the forces had handled adult protesters. The prospect of children filling jails was also disturbing. In spite of these reservations, King made the difficult decision to move forward with the plan. A recruitment effort began, starting with the distribution of leaflets and a mass rally. High school and college students were called to a mass meeting. They volunteered in high numbers. Their younger, elementary-age siblings found the idea of marching for freedom exciting and necessary. Youthful enthusiasm added momentum to the cause. A special team of activists helped train thousands of young people in the art of peaceful demonstration, holding workshops in schools and churches. King, dressed uncharacteristically in overalls, participated in these sessions. The trainers prepared marchers for what to expect and how to react. They wanted to make clear to the volunteers the importance of nonviolence and self-discipline. Nonviolent response, even to violent confrontation, was required behavior. The march begins May 2nd. What later became known as the Children's Crusade began on May 2nd and unfolded over several days. The first wave of protest began with the aim of having the young people walk downtown to talk to the mayor about conditions in the city. More than 1,000 children gathered at a church and set out for a half-mile trip in groups of 50, walking 2 by 2. They did not get far before being arrested by police and escorted to jail. Hundreds of children were arrested the first day. Marcher Janice Kelsey, who has vivid memories of the time, reported this about her experience. It wasn't so bad. There was a cold concrete floor and an iron bed. That was unpleasant. But I had friends there, and I was fighting for a cause. The second day of the march was far more intense. An estimated 1,500 young people began the march. This time, Bull Connor allowed the same forceful tactics used against adults to be used against the young protesters. Some marchers were exposed to fierce attack dogs. Others were exposed to the full blast of high-pressure fire hoses. Streeter Gary, another young marcher at the time, recalled a confrontation in this way. I can remember us balling up, hugging together, and the water just washing us down the street. The water was very, very forceful. The protest continued, on and off, across the next few days. By May 8th, the two sides, with the assistance of federal officials, began negotiations to end the demonstrations. These talks often ended abruptly without solid resolution. However, by May 10th, hundreds of children were released from city and county jails. The activists had accomplished the mission of filling the jails and of bringing courageous actions against injustice to the attention of the nation. Children Crusaders make history. Over the course of the marches, a national outcry arose as the news media transmitted startling photographs of young people being subjected to the violent response of the police and fire departments. These images helped enlighten the nation. Shocked and outraged Americans across the country were inspired by seeing the children taking a cause so seriously. Putting these confrontations on the world stage helped shed light on the need for stronger laws. The year would continue to be a tumultuous one in the city of Birmingham. There would be more struggles on the adult front. There would be other confrontations and violent actions on the part of those who still opposed change. There would be heart-wrenching news headlines. The Children's Crusade was considered a significant moment in the civil rights movement. The protests in Birmingham contributed to the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Memories of the May 1963 marches linger to this day because they illustrate how when young people unite and take action, remarkable results can follow.